Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be doing a session today about HubSpot and Salesforce integration. So just to do a quick introduction, I'm James and this is Scott. We're co-founders of HubStart. We're basically a HubSpot solutions partner agency that works with a lot of different clients on CRM onboardings and HubSpot CMS development, as well as custom integrations between HubSpot and other systems within your tech stack. And we've been doing a few of these different sessions to help people to get understanding of some more complex functionality that HubSpot can do, and sort of talk about a few different use cases for problems we might have had with those more advanced things that we want to do with HubSpot. And then from there, if there's any questions, we can maybe bat those around and talk about them on the session today. So with that in mind, before I get into the nitty gritty of it, I'll just hand over to Scott to introduce what we're doing.
Yeah, so today we're talking about one of the very common issues when business kind of get to a point where they're looking to migrate their systems. Today we'll be talking more around Salesforce. So obviously one of the bigger issues when migrating from Salesforce to HubSpot, for whatever reasons you've decided to change, is that information is represented differently in different systems. So that transition can be quite challenging and requires a bit of planning, and obviously the motivation to make sure that is done correctly is you need to think about how these entities represent in each system. So this is a very common issue with a lot of clients, a little bit of forefront, a bit of understanding of what a property actually means, and especially when it comes around data ownership, what data owns what. So if you have Salesforce, you need to think about, is this system coming from another system? How is that data getting updated? And how is that going to be transferred across? So we got so the accuracy of your data is maintained, especially, when you're talking about reports and sales reports and processes. So it's definitely, it's a thing that is not necessarily difficult, but it requires some thought and some effort. And we're going to go through a series of stages of how we kind of prepare for that, how we implement that, and then how we generally overcome issues. So not all situations are generally going to be covered. There's always going to be data sources you're not aware of or third-party updates. So, integration is not just a once-off kind of process. It goes through the planning, the actual transferring of data, and then through QA. So over time, making sure that those systems are aligning and they're reporting to the same kind of information, and that reports that were in Salesforce are still being accurately reflected in HubSpot. So you're not losing information or over-reporting or under-reporting. So with that said, I'm going to hand it back to James so we can start going through the prep stage to begin with.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. So let me just share my screen now. Can everyone see this spreadsheet I'm showing here? Is that showing up for you, Scott?
Yes, I can see it.
Cool.
Yep.
I assume it's for everybody else then. So when I tackle HubSpot Salesforce integration, or indeed when any member of my team does that, we start with this planning stage, and this comes back to the points that Scott has just mentioned around getting accurate data, mapping data correctly, understanding the structure of the data that you have within Salesforce and the structure that you have in HubSpot if you're already using HubSpot, and how those two are going to effectively combine together. Also about making decisions such as what data actually does need to sync between these systems, because obviously we don't want to sync data for the sake of syncing it, and we may find that that causes more pollution within one system or the other if we try and do that rather than actually thinking about things methodically up front. So I've got this spreadsheet here, which a colleague of mine kindly put together previously, and this basically gives a breakdown of the different standard fields that are mapped between HubSpot and Salesforce. So what we normally do at the start of integration project to sort of work through this, explain about the structure of data between the two systems, and then talk about those different fields, what they have in Salesforce already, what they have in HubSpot already, and on a high level, what the goals are of the integration. So if you're thinking about doing integration between HubSpot and Salesforce, this is definitely the place to start and think about like what your direction is and what you're trying to achieve from this, with consideration for other stakeholders in your company that use both those systems. Because it's not just a situation necessarily of you moving from Salesforce to HubSpot. We've seen a lot of companies that want to keep Salesforce because they're so into Salesforce for their sales process, but they find the Salesforce functionality for marketing quite underwhelming. So they'll bring in HubSpot, being historically a good marketing product, even though it's gone on from there since. But they'll want to make the two work together so that their marketing team can market in HubSpot, and there could be a seamless move then from the marketing happening in HubSpot to the sales happening in Salesforce. So when we sort of come to a HubSpot Salesforce integration project, then one of the first things that we want to make people aware of is the difference between the two different systems in terms of like the data structure. So when you look at HubSpot, if you're already a HubSpot user or a HubSpot super user, you'll know that there are concepts of contacts, companies, deals, and also different types of activities such as tasks and engagements. And then there's also the marketing campaigns within the Marketing Hub Pro and Enterprise packages. Whereas in Salesforce, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So whereas with companies, it's just a different terminology. You just call them accounts within Salesforce. And with deals, you'll call them opportunities. And with task engagements, they're wrapped up into activities. For contacts, it's a bit more broken down than that. So you have separate objects for contacts and leads. And then you also might have the concept of like a one person account where it's just a contact and there's no account set that's attached to that. So within Salesforce, that cycle might look like you start with a lead going to the system, and then when that lead converts, you convert that lead record into a contact record, for which point an account might then be created and linked to that new contact. But in HubSpot world, it's a contact all the way through, from the point where that person enters the system to the point that they become a customer and beyond. So getting the teams to sort of understand the different terminologies and to be able to comfortably switch between the two will mean that when marketing team and the sales team are talking about this integration that they want to achieve, if indeed it is a situation of being on both systems, then everyone understands what each other means and we're all talking about the same thing. So we get that sort of out the way first. Depending on whether campaigns being used, we might talk about how sales campaigns in Salesforce differ from HubSpot marketing campaigns and the fact that they don't directly link. That's sort of a bit more of a difficult topic to discuss, but essentially like a Salesforce campaign for sales would be about or sales activities that are happening as part of that campaign. And with Marketing Hub, of course, it's putting different assets and linking them, like such as marketing emails, social posts, ad campaigns, things like that, linking those to a campaign. And then when contacts engage with content on that, measuring the success of that campaign overall and what revenue it brings in for the company. So those being two separate things, that's sometimes a sticking point that you need marketing and sales to understand in terms of two things called the same thing, but actually being things that are very different. So once we've cleared that discussion up, we'd sort of look at the kind of data mappings we want to do, and we'd look at the contacts, the companies, and the deals pretty much all the time. And sometimes we might talk about the tickets, which is something that's newly brought in as part of an integration as a one-way sync. And we'd also talk about the activities we want to sync between the two systems. So starting with the contacts, these would be synced up between contacts in HubSpot, as we mentioned, leads and contacts in Salesforce, and they have common mappings between the two. So whatever mappings you create for leads in Salesforce will be the same mappings as you have for contacts in Salesforce, which will then all link to the contacts within HubSpot. So we'll talk them through sort of these and just show them like these basic fields. And this is something that you as a super user, if you're managing the integration, could do as well. And then think about those custom fields that you have in the system that are more unique to your business that do need to be synced between both systems. So one example might be if you are a SaaS company to be SaaS company and you ask certain pre-qualifying questions about like, are you with a competitor? Are you with which competitor are you with? And that might be a drop down. How many users might need our software and things like that. That might fit more onto like deal properties. Or if there's anything around the contact or the company itself, such as the number of like effective sites, and if it's like a manufacturing company, for instance. But whatever custom fields there are that relate to the business that's doing the integration, which could maybe that's your business or maybe it's your client's business. So when you think about those fields, some of that data might be useful to have going between the two systems. Like perhaps you're collecting some information in some HubSpot forms that you then want to bring over into Salesforce so that the sales team can then take action on that. Or perhaps there's data that the sales team are collecting during the pre-qualification process for turn them into a sales qualified lead. And you want to sync that information back to HubSpot so that the marketing team can then do some ongoing nurturing either during the sales process or perhaps if a deal goes to close lost, doing some close lost nurturing that's more personalized using the information that sales collected during the sales process. Or perhaps you just got a load, if you're moving from one to another, you just got a load of useful data in Salesforce about that's related to your business. You want to get that into HubSpot so that you can market on that or so that your sales team can pick up where they left off if they're also moving into HubSpot. So we'll look at that. We'd fill out all the mappings in the sheet for all the different points of data you want to sync for contacts, companies, deals, potentially tickets, and potentially custom objects as well. Works the same with custom objects. And then from there, we'd also then start to think about how we want these mappings to work. So you'll see here we've got a section for sync rules. So when you're syncing data between HubSpot and Salesforce, you can have different sync rules that relate to ownership of the data. So you could have it with a two-way sync, where whichever system has most up-to-date data, that data is considered the source of truth, and it will just sync over and overwrite the older data in the other system back and forth. Or if you say that, hey, because Salesforce is my sales system, I want to prefer the data in Salesforce and say that is the source of truth. Excuse me, then you probably put it as prefer Salesforce or always use Salesforce. That basically means that if certain data gets put into HubSpot and Salesforce says something different, then what's in Salesforce will overwrite HubSpot. What's in Salesforce will be considered that source of truth. And there could be a few reasons for that. Main reason would be if the salesperson has verified some data, they're going to, and they're using Salesforce, they'll input that into Salesforce. And if you're saying the salesperson is more likely to be right than about that, then you want to say that that Salesforce data, it takes precedence over what's in HubSpot. And then that could be because perhaps you've got some HubSpot forms and someone might submit a different phone number or submit some kind of trash data that's going to then, you don't want to then overwrite your sales team's record of what that person's correct phone number is. So with preferred Salesforce, it basically means that we will take Salesforce to be true unless Salesforce is blank in that field. Salesforce doesn't know, in which case we'll sync what HubSpot says, at which point Salesforce will be the source of truth. And for always use Salesforce, that basically means that Salesforce is right, even if it says nothing, even if the field is blank. So if HubSpot has something, Salesforce has nothing, then Salesforce will update the HubSpot value to blank to say maybe that data is no longer relevant, so that removes that from HubSpot as well. And these can be controlled on a field by field basis. So as you're doing this planning, which as you can see already is quite a detailed and in-depth process, you can think about for each piece of data, is this will likely be correct if marketing says it's correct, or if the marketing forms are being submitted and saying that's correct, or should we say that what Salesforce says and what sales says is correct? So once you've got through those, you might also think about what kind of activities you want to sync back between HubSpot and Salesforce. This is a little bit more limited. So there are a lot of different types of marketing and sales events in HubSpot that you can sync across into Salesforce. Does that include like marketing engagements? If the sales team is using HubSpot for sales activities, then writing those over to Salesforce. Any form submissions, writing over to Salesforce. So those can all be synced across. And then for any Salesforce tasks, those can in turn be synced back into HubSpot if that data is relevant to everyone that's living in HubSpot. So you just got to think about that data as with the rest of the fields. Is that something that's going to be useful for sales to have insight of in Salesforce coming from HubSpot? And is sales as tasks something that the marketing team might want to see within HubSpot or the sales team when they're in HubSpot? So once that process is complete and we've sort of mapped this document out, then at that point and only at that point would we go on and connect the integration and start configuring it based on the plan we put together. So I'm on our HubSpot demo account here. I have set up a a Salesforce demo account as well and connected these two up before this meetup. But the process for actually doing that integration is very simple. You literally start with installing the app. Then at that point, you authenticate with your Salesforce login, which then becomes the integration user between the two systems. It then guides you to install a plugin into Salesforce so that it gives HubSpot the right permissions and things like that to sync data across and so that data can be displayed in Salesforce and vice versa. And then it sort of takes you into the point where you can set up your sync rules. So here's what that connected integration looks like. And you could access this the same way you'd sort of go to any integration settings, which of course is through the connected apps section of your main HubSpot account settings. And from there, it'll take you to this screen where you can control things such as mappings, check for errors, and set up various other rules around the data syncing between both systems. So some of those things you'll recognize in the mappings here already from the spreadsheet. So that's why it's good to get it set up and plan within the spreadsheet first, because then you've got an easy job of then replicating that within the system and making sure you get accurate pretty much first time. So you'll see in here already that when the integration was connected, a ton of different fields have already been mapped. All these are like the standard fields in HubSpot and Salesforce. And the same is true for the other objects that you switch on to sync. And if we look into one of these mappings, you'll see within here, like the mapping between the HubSpot field and the corresponding Salesforce field. If I wanted to do another custom mapping, for instance, then I could go and add a new mapping. At that point, I could select any field within HubSpot system and select a corresponding field within my Salesforce system and set up those two to sync. If you haven't created those fields already, that's fine. You can just create those and come back here and refresh and they'll be there straight away. When you're creating fields for the two systems as well, you need to think about what those field types are and make sure that they can be synced between the two systems. So for instance, a single text field to a single text field, that's always going to sync because it's just text. Numbers to numbers, that shouldn't be an issue either. HubSpot drop-downs to Salesforce pick lists, that's one you need to think a bit more about, because if you have a pick list in Salesforce, typically you'd want to also have a matching pick list in HubSpot rather than just matching information in one system's pick list to a text field in the other, because that leaves that field open to like data quality issues. If you take a pick list in Salesforce and sync it to a text field in HubSpot, then people could then edit values within HubSpot, which because they're not in the Salesforce pick list or because they're misspelt or something like that, then that data is just not going to sync back to Salesforce and you're going to end up with a mismatch between your two systems. Or likewise, if you've got data that's a bit all over the place in a text field and you want to clean that up into a drop down in HubSpot so that marketing can segment the data and they can do some proper personalization in their nurture flows, for instance, then you'll want to get that cleaned up first. And sometimes that can be quite a painful process. Like I've had situations where people have had their city and their state and their country as completely open fields for values to be input into on one or both systems, and they've ended up with a ton of junk data where people have put USA, United States, America, North America, or within the country field, or even they've completely ignored the point and they put their city in the country field, or they put don't want to tell you, something like that. And that can be a bit of a nightmare to clean up if you've got to export all that data and sort of go through it, try and rationalize it. But getting that done can be really valuable for both marketing and sales, because that means that that's a one-off thing. You cleaned up that set of data and now you can segment your marketing or indeed your sort of sales prospecting by a clean set of data in a drop-down / pick list. The harder ones, of course, are if you've been using these systems for a long time because you have a lot more data. But if you're to go into a fresh system for one or for both, then lucky you, you can. This is something you should really think about getting right from the start, having things that are more set that you know you're going to use for marketing and sales, prospecting and segmentation later. So when you're mapping a new field, you'll see it's got the different options here that I mentioned. So what different preference you want, what source of truth you want between the two systems. And then you can just go ahead and add that mapping, and that will then be added to your mappings between the two systems. At that point, if you select sync now, it will start syncing that data in real time between the two systems, or you can click sync gradually to preserve like your API calls, because those of course are restricted between both systems, so that data syncs gradually over time as fields are updated. So let's have another quick look down these mappings. So you see you've got a warning here. So this comes back to my point about drop downs and pick lists. HubSpot and the integration here is going to tell you if you've got mismatching values. So this is something you should probably check every 2 weeks or a month or something like that, so that any missing values can be added so that errors in your data will then sync, or missing data will then sync across the two systems. And if you need to adjust a mapping at any point, you can go in and do that. Another thing to think about is also those high level rules, like what do I actually want to sync on a high level between the two systems? So that could be perhaps you only want a one-way sync. You only want HubSpot data to sync to Salesforce. Perhaps you want it to sync directly into contacts if you're not using the lead functionality in Salesforce. And perhaps you want Salesforce data to sync to HubSpot when there's a new record created. And then thinking about your delete rules, like do you want to delete from HubSpot if something's deleted in Salesforce to keep a clean match between the two systems? And then here you've got linking the opportunity stage to the lifecycle stages, which are HubSpot and Salesforce's equivalents for those. From there, on the contacts only, you've also got the concept of an inclusion list. So with an inclusion list, you're basically saying what data from HubSpot do I want to be synced for Salesforce, and on what situations. Perhaps you want all data to be synced between both systems, but in my experience, most people don't. Like, common situation here, perhaps you are using HubSpot and Salesforce, HubSpot for marketing, Salesforce for sales, and you want marketing qualified leads to sync automatically from HubSpot to Salesforce, so sales can pick them up and take them into their sales process as leads. In that situation, you would want to set up an inclusion list for all your MQLs, so that when you're, say, if you've got a lead scoring workflow that says once my lead score reaches 50, I want to make my contacts in HubSpot an MQL, that will add them to the inclusion list. They'll go to Salesforce. Sales can pick that up immediately. Or perhaps you want to include as an MQL anyone who's completed a form or any other kind of main action that means sales should pick that up already. So that inclusion list will help keep your Salesforce clean, and it means that sales are only getting in their system what they need to see if they live in Salesforce. So over here, same sort of mappings for companies and for deals. And here is the activities mappings that I mentioned at the moment. Looks like I've got a bit of a permissions error here. So probably because I'm using a dev account here. But that raises a good point as well. Like when you're the integration user, you need to make sure that you have the correct permissions within Salesforce on your account. So that means like being able to access all objects and all fields, having read-write access to all those objects and fields. And that way you'll be able to use your integration user account to sync between the two systems. Initially, the integration user is going to be you because, of course, you need to be going through your Salesforce UI, going through and looking at your objects, checking what types of properties you have within the system, and potentially creating new Salesforce fields, or editing Salesforce fields, or just checking how they're structured so that you can replicate them within HubSpot correctly. But once you've done the integration and you sort of ready to publish it, at that point, you could go and then basically change the production integration user to a like a integration user type account in Salesforce. And the benefit of that is that you're not end up using a paid seat all the time in Salesforce to control this integration, because unlike some integrations where everything happens directly through an API key, with Salesforce, as we know, permissions are a lot more complicated than something that could just work with an API key or a private app token or something like that. And that's why that uses a physical user account and the permissions of that user account being inherited by the integration to sync data between the two. But once you've got to the point where the integration is all set up, then you could change to using integration user permissions Salesforce account, which then means that that account is using a paid seat, but the data will continue to flow between the two systems. And that integration user would already be a user role that's set up with all the permissions needed to make data sync correctly between the two systems. So had this been working in my dev environment, it basically would have looked similar to what you have here, like options to switch on syncs between these different activity types. And then also to connect them to a Salesforce task type. So with Salesforce, the way it syncs is to an actual task, which then gets marked as complete, which may sound a bit bizarre. It did to me when I first sort of saw it, but it basically means that any sort of engagements that you have in HubSpot that you want to sync to Salesforce will appear as completed tasks in that Salesforce record, which the sales team or Salesforce users can then see. So another thing to mention about this is perhaps the Salesforce tasks aren't giving a good window into what's happening in HubSpot. There is sort of a means to do that that's being improved at the moment. There's actually a new version of this that's out now. So this is basically the set like this, like the HubSpot Visual Force window for Salesforce. So this is something that you can put into Salesforce lead contact account records, where it gives you a window into the matching record within HubSpot and pulls in things like the activities, all of the values from the record, and so on, so that you can just sort of see that snapshot from the Salesforce record itself. You can choose where that appears and indeed on what objects you want it to appear. So for instance, if I was to go onto the lead object within Salesforce, then I can go to the page layout over here. I can then go to whatever my active lead layout is, or to several if I want it in several of them. And after the integration has been installed, you'll see that there's now a new Visual Force page that has come up. There's actually a couple in here, the old one and the new one. The new one is definitely quite a lot more powerful. So let me drop this into the record. I'll just drop it down here. Of course, you can make a new section for it if you wanted to. So let's have a look, see if I've got any test leads that I can take a look at. So let's see if this is gonna load in a test environment. No, it's not. That's a bit annoying. But let me just go back to this screenshot then. So basically, it gives you that insight. In the new version, it also lets you enroll directly in sequences, as well as in sort of putting people into meetings, things like that. So you can actually use some of the Sales Hub functionality directly from within some of the HubSpot functionality of Sales Hub directly within Salesforce. And that way, if your sales team have accounts in both systems and they have a Sales Hub seat at HubSpot and they're using Salesforce, they can use some of those sort of enablement features, so sales enablement features of HubSpot directly from within Salesforce without jumping between both systems. So that's something that can be quite powerful. So going on from there, last thing that we really need to talk about is the sort of handling sync errors. So once you've got your integration set up, you've got the correct objects mapped that you want to map between the two systems, you've got all the field mappings done, you've got everything in the right format, and everything is flowing that you want to flow between HubSpot and Salesforce. That's not sort of a leave it and done situation, because as we've seen by talking through this, like when you've got two different systems with different sets of data and different structures, sometimes there might be a bit of a disconnect that emerges because perhaps you're making configuration changes in HubSpot, perhaps you're adding new pick list options to a pick list in Salesforce, perhaps people are working in one system and accidentally creating duplicates, which is then messing up what you've got in the other system as well. These things can all happen, and the integration sort of sync errors dashboard here helps you identify those things and do ongoing housekeeping. So depending on how many errors you get coming in and how much data you've got in both systems, you'll want to make sort of a cadence for yourselves to check up on this and do any housekeeping for any errors that have come up. So as this is a dev account, I obviously don't have any errors to show. So I've gone in and got a few anonymous screenshots from one of my clients' accounts here, just to show you what some of these errors might look like, give you an idea of what you might be facing when you're doing this kind of housekeeping. So for instance, pick list errors, as I just spoke about, that is a really common one. That might be something like inactive deal stages in Salesforce. It might be inactive owners in one or both systems where it's trying to sync the owner of a record. However, that owner is inactive in one system, so it can't make them the owner because they're inactive in that system. Or it could be that you have a pick list with all the different like lead statuses, for instance, and you've got some kind of a option in there that you're adding in Salesforce because the sales team thought this is something I need, but they haven't actually told the HubSpot super user they need to add it in there as well. So the dashboard will flag that up when errors start happening because those drop downs don't match up. You also might have field validation kind of issues. So we're in HubSpot, you can have different field validation rules on the HubSpot version of that property from the Salesforce field. And the Salesforce fields tend to have more complex validation rules because even in HubSpot, like validation rules are quite a new thing. But in Salesforce, that's been around for forever, and there's a lot of different options available. So this is a common error here where, like, if the string length has been restricted or the data type has been restricted, then obviously a value can't sync to that field in that other system that's got that more stringent validation. So you've got to clean up the data in the system that's got the too long city, or you've got to change your rules in the other system so that the validation rules cover each other. And then duplicates. Duplicates is quite a tricky one to deal with because with HubSpot, it's quite simple. If two contacts have the same email, they're a duplicate. HubSpot will stop you from adding two contacts to the same email, as we know. And then same with companies. If the company domain name matches, it won't let you create that record again. In Salesforce, you can have much more complex duplicate rules. And therefore, if you end up with sort of someone submitting a form on one computer, submitting a form on their phone, different emails each time, but the names and the countries and things match, then Salesforce and its duplication rules might pick up on that and stop the two from syncing. So in that situation, you've then got to clean up those records in HubSpot, merge the two together into one, so that they can then sync as one into Salesforce. So that's just a few different examples there. There are a lot of different things that can come up, but you've just got to keep on top of those every week, 2 weeks, month, depending on your organization size, and perhaps potentially have the super user in your company for HubSpot and Salesforce the same, or at least have an SOP where when there's updates to one system, you always talk to the super user for the other system first to make sure that you're aligned. And then when the implementation happens, you stay aligned. But you still got this dashboard here to help you if something slips through the cracks. So it's covering you there. So that is pretty much everything there is with the integration between HubSpot and Salesforce. So it's not that difficult to set up. All you've really got to know is a good understanding of how data is structured in both systems, how to create fields in both systems, how to create lists, things like that. And you should be fine with setting up a sync between both. But it's just all about doing that planning first, really understanding what the purpose is of what you're doing so that you don't clutter both your systems, and then setting it up and maintaining it over time, as we've seen there. So with that in mind, hope that was all useful to everyone. And does anyone have any questions that they want to ask, any sort of situations they're having with problems with their Salesforce or their HubSpot integration that we can maybe talk about a bit?
Yeah, we have a couple here. With the contact in HubSpot, can you tell if it was created in Salesforce or HubSpot with the sync?
Yes, you can. Yeah, and you do that in the same way that you would look at sort of attribution of a contact or indeed a company or a deal. So some of us on here, or maybe even most of us, probably know that about the original source properties and also the latest source properties. So these will be updated automatically by HubSpot based on the origin of that record. Original source being where it came from in the first place, latest source being where the most recent conversion happened. So that could be used. That's used normally for things like seeing whether my leads have come from a paid search campaign or a paid social campaign, things like that. But under offline sources, so under original source is any of offline sources, there is then original source drill down one, which would be integration if that contact or lead has originally come from Salesforce. And then underneath that, you'd also have like the name of the application that's come from. The same as if you had leads coming in from Zoom, it would tell you in original source drill down to that that's come from Zoom, and you can then use that within your list segmentation and things like that. Likewise, you also have the IDs, ID fields, so like last sync time and things like that, what the IDs are of the other system, so you can actually see if the record is synced between both. But if you look at original source, that's probably the best way to know the origin, because if it says integration Salesforce, it's come from Salesforce. If it says something else, then it started in HubSpot.
All right, cool. The next question, it's regarding workflows. Are the workflows executed when the data syncs between Salesforce and HubSpot?
Yes, because the fields will meet the criteria at that point. So if you've got enrollment criteria on your workflow for this, this, and this, and then a record syncs from Salesforce and it matches those, that'll be the same as if that data is edited in HubSpot in the first place. And that would apply for any integration as well, including like GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar, Zoom. I can't think of any others, but anything really. Like if the data gets updated to those values, that's what will happen.
Got it. And here it says if someone enters something into Salesforce, how long does it take to sync to HubSpot?
It's pretty much instant. As long as the record meets the inclusion list criteria to be synced between the two, then it should take like 2 or 3 refreshes. That's how I usually do it for that to show. If it isn't updating after that time, that is a good indication that there's something not configured correctly within the sync. Having said that, if the data is, if you've sort of got a new sync between the two systems, then the historical data might not sync right away. It's not necessarily going to sync until those fields start getting updated. So that actually raises a very good point about something I missed. When you've actually got your sync set up, go and do an import objects from apps, and from there you can select Salesforce, and then select your objects and then sync that data into HubSpot. That will give you a clean sync from Salesforce where everything's so it's up to date. And then from that point forwards, any changes will be synced between the two systems in pretty much real time.
Got it. All right, here's another one. Are the emails synced between HubSpot and Salesforce? I believe they're talking about in the contacts and the activities.
Yes, yeah, if you choose to. So there's records of when marketing emails are sent and sales emails are sent. Those will then go to Salesforce tasks when that happens. You'll only have like the subject line of those in the task title. So if you wanted to see more detail, then it's probably a good idea to have this visual force installed, because then it'll go show you the whole history in timeline order, and you can sort of click directly into that to open the marketing email in HubSpot. So yeah, that's basically what you get from that.
Okay. If you're migrating, would you set up the workflows and functionality first, or would you move all the data from Salesforce to HubSpot first?
It's a very good question. I don't think I could necessarily make a concrete decision on that based on just the question. I don't think there'll be a catch-all situation necessarily for that. I mean, if you created the workflows first and left them off, and then you sync the data across, then it's not really going to cause any issues there. And then you can switch them on and roll all the existing data, and have that go through the process. Or if you choose, you can have it where it doesn't enroll the existing data. Like if you've got loads of nurture flows, then that's probably a situation where you'd want to have the data sync happen while the workflow's off, unless indeed you want to start rolling hundreds, thousands of contacts straight into nurture flows. So really, I think you need to think about what the workflows are that you have already or that you're planning to create, what their purpose is, what you want to happen to historic records from the get-go, and then make a decision based on that. And if you don't want them in there, keep the workflows off or don't even build them until the data is synced.
Yeah, and I would comment on that as well. It's you know, if you're moving your sales team to from Salesforce to HubSpot, and they've been around for a long time, a lot of transaction, you're going to need a phased approach just to avoid overwhelming the transition and making sure, you know, that all the functionality in HubSpot is from Salesforce is captured in HubSpot, so you minimize your downtime and probably run parallel activities at some point. But if you're more newer or it's a new department or new division, then a cutoff approach is generally easier if there's not too much historical actions, and then that's just a matter of patching any gaps over time. So I think it's for sure, I agree with James. It's really a case by case situation on where you are with your business and that situation. So I mean, following up on that, you know, James, I guess, you know, in your experience, what are the general issues that companies fall? Is it third-party tools? Is it third-party applications? Is it encoding data? What are those major uh, those issues that companies generally have when they're doing those transitions?
I mean, the main one is data quality, and data consistency and things like that for all the existing data. Like sometimes if someone's already got Salesforce and there's a ton of junk in there, they've just got HubSpot, they've got a brand new blank, clean HubSpot. That's where that can be a challenge in itself, because you don't want to take over all the rubbish that you've got in Salesforce as well as all the good stuff. And that sometimes then necessitates not just some real close thought about what data we actually want to sync, what's going to be useful, but also for what the stuff is going to be useful, like how can we make sure when it comes across that it actually is useful, and does that even mean some data cleanup that needs to happen in Salesforce before we enable the integration, or likewise in HubSpot if we're going the other way around.
All right. I think we don't really have, we're at 10 a.m. now. So I think, yeah, we kind of hit our limit here. Is there any additional comments you want to add, James?
Um, not much. Just generally to wrap up. I mean, so as we covered quite a lot of good questions here. I mean, we do quite a lot of these HubSpot Salesforce integrations for different companies. So if you have questions about how to do an integration, then feel free to like drop us an email. That'll be at hello@hubstart.io. That's hello@hubstart.io, and we'll be able to get back to you with our thoughts on how you can do that. And likewise, if you're sort of feeling overwhelmed with this task, or you want to partner with us basically, or with another organization to to actually put integration in place, or indeed to issue the integration, then that's absolutely fine. Reach out to us about that as well, and we could basically go through the same process that we've just talked about with you. Really, we take you through this journey, and be that an existing setup or a new setup, we can help you get that cleaned up, or help you get that set up the right way. So yeah, please reach out if that's something that we can be of help for you with.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for their time. And in the next couple of weeks, we'll be setting up another webinar, and we hope to see you there.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Take care.
All right. See ya.
Bye bye.